Christine Figgener, a world-renowned marine biologist currently in Costa Rica. Christine, so lovely to meet you.
Good morning, Sharon, from my side.
Lovely. I so enjoyed reading your book, My Life with Sea Turtles. An absolutely fascinating exploration of how he became involved, but importantly, the message of why they're important. But let's start at the beginning. What was young Christine like, and what was your passions growing up?
Well, young Christine, I think, was not always an easy child, would probably my parents tell at least. I think I was an inquisitive child, curious about the world, but also sometimes a little bit scared of things that she couldn't grasp at that point. And this is probably the reason of why I fell in love with the ocean. Because when I was vacationing as a very young child, I was about, I think, less than 2 years old. My dad always points out I was still allowed to fly for free. Um, so we were in Greece at the Mediterranean, and I guess I was throwing kind of a tantrum because I didn't want to go into the water because it was a little bit freaked out by the little critters I could see just barely under the water surface. And so my dad, being a German engineer and all matter of factly, just said, okay, instead of just saying, well, then stay out of the water, he actually bought me a pair of goggles and said, well, put them on, look underwater and check out what's there. It's nothing to be scared of. And yeah, that really was the magic moment, I think, because it sparked this interest in exploration, also a little bit of the mystery, right, that the ocean holds for us
Mm.
humans as we are land dwelling animals. And I just think there is this, it's almost like outer space, right? It's not our
Yes.
turf kind of thing. And so there's so much that we don't know, so many things that are very alien feeling, really, I think also. And I was lucky because my parents are ocean people. So vacationing, we usually did somewhere at the ocean. And my dad is also interested in a lot of different things. My mom as well. And, they both read. And so they gave me books about the ocean. Jacques Cousteau, Hans Hess, that was, what they already had on their bookshelves. Documentaries back in the days. That was, kind of the way of how they fostered these, yeah, I think this kind of blossoming passion probably. And I also have to say, my dad is, he would probably not call it himself that way, but he is a kind of natural storyteller. So he has a lot of general knowledge, I would say. And instead of just boring you with just fact after fact, he would always tell kind of the human story or, something that would hook you and listen to it. And then you would also learn something. Um, and so I think this is kind of how he really hooked me to the ocean, unknowingly, maybe. And I was pretty young already when I knew that I wanted to be an ocean explorer. I didn't have, of course, the word marine biologist at that point. That was something I cannot really actively recall when that transition over. But yeah, after that, it was really kind of a very clear road for me, what needs to be done for me to study marine biology. And I guess the other passion I had was travel. And I also liked languages, foreign languages. And so I kind of hoped by becoming a marine biologist, I would be able to travel, explore foreign places, and yeah, just, kind of follow the heroes in the footsteps of my heroes, I guess, that have been traveling all over the world.
So how wonderful to have that clear vision and intention when you were young. So many people sort of stumble around thinking, what should I do with my life? But you write in great detail about your journey to Costa Rica. Tell us about the first impressions of the research station.
Oh, yeah, well, that was, it is sometimes, I know, I'm sure people have had this moment as well when you have anticipated a moment for a very, very, very long time. A lot of times the expectations or the pictures that you have in your mind do not align with what you will find, right? So I guess what I expected because I didn't know any better. I thought, okay, we're going to live in some camp somewhere on the beach. Maybe we're lucky and we have some running water somewhere. But I had summer camp in mind, the camps that I've been going to as an adolescent. And there we usually, first thing, we had to dig a hole, where the toilet would be placed. Then if it filled up too much, we actually had to like work over our, well, things. So I was
Yeah.
expecting more something like that. And when I arrived, it was actually, wood buildings. They had roofs. There were beds. There was a kitchen area. So, my expectations were so much lower than that I was like, oh, this is great. This is like a little cabin city somewhere in the jungle. So I can deal with that. This is definitely going to be fun.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. I'm not sure that all of your fellow travelers with you, and maybe you saying in the book that someone said they lost a day.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is really, I think, the moment where I learned managing expectations is
Yes.
so important, because she came with a totally different expectation, right? She was, I don't know what she expected, like a research station with like nice fancy bathrooms. So she pretty much was in tears and said, well, I cannot stay here the next month. Um, and for example, when I do trips with students or whatnot, I usually really almost down talk things, like to make it sound worse. So when people arrive with, kind of really low expectations, it's so much better if it's like actually a little bit better than what they expected. And that makes already like, it starts off the trips a lot better than as if it's a disappointment kind of thing.
That's a brilliant way to do it. You went there to study sea turtles. Let's talk about those for a moment. So, first of all, how many different species are there in the world?
Yeah, so sea turtles are not as diverse as some people might think, because the group of turtles we have literally hundreds, but sea turtles we only have seven extant species. So were more at some point because they have been around for quite a while, millions of years. In fact, species such as the leatherback have survived the extinction of the dinosaurs. And yeah, so we have these seven species. And we are very lucky that in Costa Rica we're able to see five of them rather frequently.
And so, what five species are they? And roughly, how do they range in size? And I also know that they eat very different things.
Right. Yeah. So we have, for once, the leatherback turtle, which is the only member of a separate group. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is, like just right after. Then we do have the two Ridley species, the olive Ridley and the Kemp's Ridley. We have the loggerhead turtle, we have the green turtle, we have the hawksbill turtle, and we have the flatback turtle, which are all having a hard shell in comparison to the leatherback. So leatherbacks actually look very different. They do not have this typical turtle shell as people would assume. Many people have never even seen a leatherback, so they don't really know they exist. So I always call them almost like the unicorns of our oceans, because it is really some kind of almost a mystical creature. They have these ridges that run along their body. They're black. They have no scales, which is typical for reptiles, and turtles have that as well. And leatherbacks are also the largest of all sea turtles. So the average carapace length, so that's the upper part of the shell, measures here in the Caribbean about 1 meter 50. So I'm 1 meter 70. That's a lot, yeah, that's pretty large.
Wow.
And then they're massive, right? So they weigh between 300, 600 kilograms. And then in the order of the other ones, so next comes the green turtle, which measures about 1 meter 10. Then comes the loggerhead, the hawksbill, hawksbill, flatback are kind of the same. And then the two Ridley species are the smallest ones with only about 60, 70 centimeters carapace length. Yeah, and the curious thing is that sea turtles can be found in similar habitats. So they're all tropical because they're reptiles, right? So that means they cannot regulate their own body temperature. So that means they depend on the environment to, yeah, to pretty much live, and that means they're kind of confined to about waters above 25 degrees Celsius, and they also nest on tropical beaches. So, in fact, it is not unusual that we have more than one sea turtle species nesting on the same beach. And anybody that is a little bit into ecology and biology knows that there is a good chance if you're too similar as a species and requiring similar resources, you might actually outcompete each other. So one species is just a little bit better at a certain thing and will dominate the area and will pretty much make the other species go extinct. But for some reason, that didn't happen to the extant species of sea turtles. And the hypothesis is that they have pretty much divided the diet, right? So they're very specific in what they're feeding on. Some of the species are what we call specialists, so they are feeding on very particular foods. The leatherback is one of them. She feeds mainly on jellyfish. The hawksbill is another one. She feeds mainly on sponges. The green turtle is another one. She's our vegetarian turtle. So she feeds mainly on seagrasses. So you can already tell the diets don't really overlap in a lot of those senses, right? And in the species that might feed on something similar, they can actually not be found in the same areas. And this is very likely the secret to the coexistence of those species in our ocean.
That's really interesting. It was both found it fascinating to me at the green turtle grazing on the seagrass and actually keeping it just right for the sea turtle, which in turn is just right for a myriad of other creatures and really important to the ecology. So as the numbers are declining, I wonder how that might change the actual underwater ecology of seagrass and all of the other underground plants. Similarly, the hawksbill turtle plucking sponges from the coral reef, and am I right to think that that's also part of the maintenance of the coral reef?
Absolutely, yeah. So really interesting thing about sea turtles is of course people always think about them and they need to be protected. And I think a lot of people just like sea turtles because they're cute, right? They are what we call charismatic megafauna. They have these really childlike features, so we respond to them emotionally. But the truth is they're actually really important for a healthy oceanic ecosystem, right? So we talk about that as the keystone species that do maintain health in our oceans. And yeah, you just gave like two of the best examples: green turtles that are keeping seagrass meadows in check, and then the hawksbills that are keeping sponge growth in check. So coral reefs that grow a lot slower are actually able to do their thing. And the problem is always, and I think we've seen it over and over in the past, is that when things get out of balance, then things do not turn out too well, right? And a lot of times we don't really know what happened until it happens, and that is definitely a problem because then we can usually not fix it in the retrospective. And so we do talk, when we're trying to explain to people about the importance of sea turtle, that it's really they're kind of the architectures or gardeners in the ocean, especially those two species. But in the sense of leatherbacks, since they're feeding on jellyfish, it's also about, our fisheries and our provision of food, right? Because we're already overfishing our oceans. Fish start out small, tiny as larval, and they usually, are kind of summarized in the big zooplankton thing. And jellyfish feed on exactly these larval fish. And so, if there is too many jellyfish, that means also there is a lot more jellyfish that will feed on the larval fish, right? And so that means there is no next generation. Yeah. So definitely
It's
very
big.
important for the health. Yeah.
And of course, we've got coral reefs being bleached and dying for other environmental reasons, such as climate change, which conversely must mean that hawksbill turtles are finding it harder to find food. Or are they not in those areas? Is there not that direct correlation, or don't you know?
Well, I am not aware of any study that has looked at a correlation of bleached reefs and the disappearance of hawksbills, but it also so happens that hawksbills are two of the 7 species that are critically endangered already, even without the whole coral bleaching thing. So globally, we do not have that many hawksbill turtles left. And so sometimes it's probably really difficult to quantify, in all the things that are happening, because hawksbills have been hunted for centuries because of their shell. People know it as tortoiseshell. It's this really pretty pattern. And a lot of people don't know that it's from a critically endangered sea turtle species. And ironically, the advent of plastic, the invention of plastic, actually probably saved the hawksbill from becoming extinct. But I think we all know how the story with plastic is ending right now, right? So now it's posing a danger for all sea turtles. But yeah, that is.
Yeah, it is, well, that's fascinating. We'll come on to threats to the turtle population a bit later, but for now, let's talk about love. Let's talk about sea turtles mating, which I understand is a specialism of yours. First of all, tell us what we know about how sea turtles get together, because they're quite solitary, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And the thing is, we actually do not know as much as I would wish for, about sea turtle love and sea turtle mating. So we do know that the males and the females return to the beaches that they've been born on. Males will not go onto the beach, but they will meet in front of the beach with the females in order to mate. And we really don't know how males and females really find each other, for example, other than, okay, we're kind of having the same meeting point, which is one of the possibilities. But also, how do you, for example, prevent that you're mating with your own brother or your own mother, since you all were born at the same beach or in the same area? So these are also questions that, we don't know. We assume, or we think that sea turtles probably follow what we call a scramble mating system. So it's kind of like first come, first serve. Like, a male wants to mate. So the first female he will come across, he will try to mate with. But, it's really interesting to see in other turtle species, not necessarily sea turtle species. There's sometimes a lot of behavioral rituals around the mating. And so I always, thought that, there has to be some more to it as well, even in sea turtles. And
Yeah.
from what I've been able to observe, I think there is something. It's just so much more difficult to observe, of course, in sea turtles that are in the vast ocean than having, smaller freshwater turtles in an aquarium that you can like just watch while they're mating.
But you've gone to great lengths to find out, haven't you? You're describing the book about diving to watch, hauling up these enormous turtles onto the side of the boat and doing various scientific measurements and tagging, etc., after they've just mated. So, you've done a great body of work there, and people can go onto your website, Christine Figgener, and find out your body. So research papers there. But once they've mated, tell us what happens next to the female who's floats off.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so once they're mated, the females actually start to produce clutches of eggs. And the interesting thing, it's not just one clutch per season, but depending on the species, it can be anything from two to, on average seven in the case of leatherbacks, but we even had leatherback females and paint up to 13 times in one season. And
Wow.
they're able to store the sperm of the male. So that means they mate in the beginning of the season, they store the sperm, and then they will make the first clutch of eggs. So it's almost like an assembly line, right? Sperm, the follicles, which is pretty much the kind of the egg yolk, kind of brought together, shelled, and then put into the oviduct for to be laid later on. And it takes also on the species, but about 10 to 14 days to assemble a full clutch of eggs. And she will come at night, usually onto the beach, dig a hole with her hind flippers, and then will deposit the eggs into the sand, close the hole again, and then she's also off. So there is no parental care in sea turtles. And then she will hang out for another 10 to 14 days up until the next clutch is ready to be laid, and she will go through the whole process again. And she does that, of course, then a few months um, during their nesting season. And since it's, of course, a lot of energy that is burned there, right? Producing the eggs. Also, there has, before she even came to mate, she has actually traveled quite far from her foraging, so her feeding grounds, to her mating and nesting grounds. And so she usually doesn't do that every single year, but she usually skips nesting season. In most cases, it's like 1 or 2 years that are skipped in between. So they only come every 2 or 3 years to nest. Whereas the males seem to be mating every single year because it's a little bit less energy, that males have to burn. I mean, they have to travel, but of course, producing sperm is not as energy intense as producing hundreds of eggs, because that's the other thing. So in one clutch of eggs, they're usually between 60 to 200 eggs, depending on the species.
Wow.
Yeah.
How big are they? Not the size of ping pong balls.
Yeah, that depends also on the species. Some friends recently laughed every time I'm saying, well, it depends on the species, but
Yeah.
so leatherbags are actually having eggs that are about billiard pool ball size.
Wow.
And then like the Ridleys, the hawksbills, it's more like ping pong ball size, right? And so it also kind of determines already how big the embryo and the baby turtle is. Of course, it can grow in
Yeah.
a egg that size.
And what's the shell like? I mean, they're not like chicken eggs. They're softer, are
Right.
they?
Yeah. So first of all, they're completely round, so they're not oval as in chickens. And the shell is a little bit soft, almost like maybe pergament or something like that. So it has, at least when it's dry, it has a very papery feeling. And the interesting thing, it's semi-permeable, so that means the whole gas exchange and humidity and whatnot all happens through the shell, right? So that means the embryo really needs a good environment in order to grow. So if there's not enough oxygen, if there is too much or too little humidity, it will not be able to grow in the egg.
So I read that the temperature can affect the gender of the hatchling.
Not the gender, that's a society concept, right? It's the sex, the
Oh, right. That's a
biological
load of
sex, right?
nonsense.
That's the reason I always get really mad at people sending they're going to have a gender reveal party. It's like, you have no idea what gender your child will be. You can definitely reveal its biological sex in most cases, right? But that
Yeah.
is also a whole discussion. Um, so the biological sex of the baby turtles are defined by the incubation temperature. So the hotter temperatures lead to more females, and the cooler temperatures to more males. So there is this really fun phrase in English. It says, hot chicks and cool dudes, if people want to
Ah,
remember, the which way around it is. And there's also temperature, which we call the pivotal temperature, where you will have pretty much exactly 50-50 in the nest, which is in most cases, beaches species, about 29 degrees Celsius. And some a little bit hotter and some a little bit cooler. The big issue is just that we have rising temperatures globally, and we are producing a massive amount of females. Some beaches literally only produce females. So scientists have started to worry about feminizations of populations. There is definitely the school of thought that in an endangered species that is sexually reproducing, a large amount of females is not always to the detriment if you want to make your population grow fast. But there is, of course, the point where there is not enough males anymore to fertilize, all the females and the eggs of the females. And we are unsure of, how that will play out in future.
yes, I can see that. You have a smaller genetic pool of males, which
Well,
makes it a
that
little
is
bit
another
vulnerable.
problem, right? Genetic diversity is also diminished, because if you only have one male that is just like kind of in a theory, siring every single baby, then of course they're all going to be half siblings, right? That's also not a good scenario.
So the work that you're doing in Costa Rica, I understand often you're collecting the eggs and putting them in a nursery area to protect them and keep them at the right temperature. And what have you learned from that? What science have you gained from the understanding of doing that? And why do you do it in the first place?
Yeah, so in the first place, hatcheries are usually used in two instances, either because the pressure of illegal take, so the illegal harvest of eggs, which unfortunately still happens, is too intense. So there is no good way of managing the eggs in a different way than having literally a protected area, fenced and locked and watched 24/7 to have nobody come and steal the eggs, right? So that's one of the reasons. But of course, it is also a tool to do any type of scientific research where you want to control certain variables, if you want to try out treatments. For example, a colleague of mine, she actually tried irrigation on sea turtle nests, uh, exactly because of the temperatures, right? So we know we have too high temperatures, and a lot of us in the field do not have access to climate chambers such as the NASA. So there is, of course, things like that, but it's not an option, not even feasible. Also, we learn more and more about how sea turtles even remember the beach that they need to return to as adults. And it might even start already in the egg, not just when they are hatching. And so displacing the egg somewhere, like, I don't know, into the capital of Costa Rica to have them develop and then bring them back might already mess with the
Wow.
imprinting of the sea turtles, right? So, but it is, for example, in the more or close to natural environment, because the hatcheries are usually built on the nesting beach itself to keep the sand environment very similar to the natural one. So there is other ways of how maybe temperature can be lowered, and that is shading the hatchery, but also irrigating it with water. So yeah, and that is only possible if you really have a controlled environment to really keep everything else constant. So you can really just look at the variable that you're trying to manipulate, right? To make, yeah, later on the conclusions, if or if not, it's working what you're trying to do.
Brilliant. So how does it take for the hatchlings sort of burrow their way up through the sands and make that sort of almost sweet comical waddle to the water? How long does it take from egg laying to that stage?
Yeah, so from egg laying until the babies start hatching, that's what we call the incubation period. It takes about 60 days, so about 2 months roughly. And then it is not really a process where, they pop out of the egg and are immediately popping out of the sand, but this is actually a process that takes a few days. So we don't know 100% just yet of how they are able to do it, but they are coordinating the hatch together. So if you have 60 eggs in a nest, most of those eggs that are, well, that even had an embryo developing inside healthily, they are hatching at the same time. Um, so you have, all the babies that are coming out, kind of first of poking a hole with their egg tooth into the eggshell, wiggle themselves out, and then they have to reabsorb the residual yolk that was first nourishing them and pretty much provided the building blocks of making the body of the baby and all of that. So, but it's also the food for the first weeks in the water. So they don't have to feed up until, they're where they're supposed to be, and that is out in the open ocean currents. And so after that is done, they very well, because of, they got out of the egg, the liquids were draining already, so the nest starts to collapse. And with the collapsation, it kind of accumulates underneath the babies, and the babies are, lifted almost to the surface little by little. So it can take up to 3 to 5 days to really reach the surface. And then when the temperature drops, because of course the babies don't know what time of day it is when they reach the surface, they will make a mad dash to the ocean. And the mad dash actually just takes maximum a few minutes. It
Oh,
happens usually at night, and that is why this temperature drop is really the cue. because it provides protection, right? In the dark, there's not as many predators around, seabirds that might have, a spying eye on the babies and a snack. And really important is also this group, right? So the babies, the reason of why they hatch as a group also provides protection, because usually if there is a predator can only eat one baby at a time. And so while he feeds on one of the siblings, the other ones have the chance to continue the death to the sea and hopefully make it safely there. Yeah, and then of course there can be fish already waiting and all of that. So it's not easy to be a baby sea turtle, and most of them actually perish within the first days, weeks even. And this is also one of the reasons that, sea turtles really have more the strategy of quantity over quality. So females produce hundreds of babies per nesting season because there will not be that many survivors all the way to adulthood. So the statistics say 1 out of 1,000 about makes it
Wow.
from being a baby all the way to being a sexually mature adult.
Gosh. Yes,
Yeah.
no. For those who make it, what happens next?
Yeah, for those that make it, they will pretty much go into the open ocean currents and a lot of times seek shelter in a floating algae. It's called sargassum, and will remain there. So they don't really actively swim as much anymore. The ocean currents drift them around, and it's kind of interesting. A lot of people envision the open ocean as this area teeming with life, but actually life happens really close to the coast, right? So coral reefs are teeming with life. And so the open ocean can be almost like a desert. There is not that much happening. But these sargassum flotsams, they do attract a lot of different animals. So they don't only attract little turtle babies that shelter in them and camouflage in them, but they also, attract crustacean, little crabs, little fish that all live in and around those sargassum carpets. And this is, of course, the perfect buffet for a little baby turtle to start feeding, growing as quickly as they can to a certain size. Also, very interesting, sea turtle babies don't grow first in length, but they actually grow in width. And that has something to do with not fitting into the mouth of the majority of the predators anymore.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's a gap size, gap size. So they're trying
Yeah.
to get beyond that. And yeah, once they have a certain size, which is usually we call like dinner plate size, and that can take years. So it's not in a few weeks, it's not in a few months. It can be 6 years, 3 years, 10 years. We're not entirely sure. There is some studies done on the skeleton where you can kind of see how the food changed in what age and what like growth phase. And with that, there is a way of at least estimating the age of what we call the recruitment back to the coast. And once they are a certain size and it's not as dangerous to live close to the coast anymore, that's when they move back to the coast and then really try to find a good developmental habitat with very good food sources to grow really quickly into like larger juveniles and subadults. Um, and eventually become sexually mature. But that takes a long time because sea turtles really are long lived. And so even the smallest species are estimated to take about 15 to 20 years to reach sexual maturity. And in the cases of, for example, green turtles, there's estimated say they're not reaching sexual maturity until they reach 45 years of age. So that's
Wow.
a long
And
time.
that's a long time. And how long can they live altogether? There's
Yes,
something.
this is another thing that we don't know for sure because we do have an idea of what the age at maturity is for most species, and we do have pretty good data on how long sea turtles do reproduce, because what we do is we attach flipper tags to most of our nesting females. And so with the years, we can see, of course, how often that female is coming back when she was tagged for the first time. And so there is pretty solid data that we know, 20, 30 years are not unusual necessarily for a sea turtle. And that kind of brings at least, for the majority of the species, the age at least to like 50 to 70 years. But what we don't know, for example, if sea turtles have something like a reproductive senescence. So that is kind of the menopause, if you want to think about it, if they could just kind of stop reproducing but keep on living. So we have no idea if something like that exists in sea turtles.
Gosh, so much more to learn, isn't there? It's fascinating. And um, all of them, they're cute. You say they're very charismatic megafauna. And there's a whole industry of volunteerism, which is a phrase you use in the book, which I thought was brilliant. Good bad. So I was quite horrified to hear about some bad practices. Tell us about why a well-meaning people get it wrong.
Yeah, so I think the concept of volunteerism by itself is not a bad one, right? I think I love
No,
the
no, no.
idea that people that want to go on vacation are actually willing to donate their time and efforts to good cause, right? I mean, I think this is just
Yes.
amazing, especially if you are not a biologist and maybe you are a banker and you just need a change of scenery and you have these 2 weeks of vacation each year and you want to do that. Awesome. And on the other hand, it's also, or would be, a great way of financing conservation, right? This is how it started, because the one thing that is always limiting us is really we do not have enough money floating around in conservation, especially in ocean conservation, which is unfortunately the sad reality. So a lot of projects struggle with their existence from year to year, securing funding. And so this could be a really great kind of win-win situation, right? So people are willing to cover their room and board and maybe even a little bit on top to help finance those projects. The project provide an incredible experience for the volunteers. Well, the thing is, we in the field are not experts in marketing. We are not experts in building websites. We are not tourism agencies, right? And so over the past, I would say, decades, there have been organizations, well, companies really. It's not organization because I don't even want to imply that they have anything that is meant for non-profit. So a lot of for-profit companies that have kind of found, wow, that is something I can make money with the, also the good intentions of people. So they're selling the projects on the behalf of the projects, the actual organizations, the non-profit organizations, suggesting to the people that, by paying a few thousands of dollars, that, yeah, it is expensive, but all that money is going towards conservation, when in reality, they are really not paying even, the biggest chunk of that money to the organizations. So, the organizations a lot of times more about quantity of getting a lot of volunteers to even be able to finance anything, and the rest of the money goes into the pockets of those for-profit companies. And only once the volunteers are in the field and things are kind of bespoken about, they really, find out what happened. And then they felt so good about, having made this kind of donation of a few thousand extra dollars, only to find out that this is not really reaching the intended people, right? So this is kind of what the sad thing. But luckily, of course, there are organizations really that do offer these type of trips. They do collect extra money, but they donate it. So working abroad projects is one. Sea turtles is another one, spelled with double E. Where I know really that they are supporting different projects for decades already, in especially countries in the global south, right, which have a lot of issues of acquiring funding.
Fascinating. Well, I'm going to check that out. But tell us we talked briefly about poaching and the problem, but is that getting any better globally? I think it's improving.
Well, the issue of what we call illegal tags. So we're trying to actually move away. I actually used it in my book as well, the term, but I'm trying to not use it too much. The word poaching has also already kind of like colonistic,
It does. It
connotations.
does.
So we're
Yes.
trying to really talk more about the illegal take, because a lot of times
Yes.
also it didn't used to be illegal, right? So now things have changed, laws have been established, and now all of a sudden what was just considered a harvest or a way of foraging for food is all of a
Mm.
sudden now illegal. And it has been a process, and the process is ongoing. So it hasn't been that long ago that we Europeans and the people in the US were eating sea turtle meat and sea turtle eggs as
Mm.
well, because it wasn't yet prohibited and it wasn't a taboo for other reasons. And the global south a lot of times is a little bit behind of catching up to that. Also, of course, there is a lot more, necessities, I would say, to find a way of sustain, one's family or whatnot.
Mm.
So, but even in the global south, there is a lot of sea turtle conservation that has been ongoing for decades. And a big part of the sea turtle conservation is not really the active measures. It's not about relocating the eggs into a hatchery, of patrolling the beach, actively to prevent the person from hunting the turtle and taking and slaughtering it. But the actual work is trying to change the behavior of people, right? To get to the kids and trying to instill an idea of how important these animals are for us, that it's not okay to eat them. And so hopefully with time, all of these active measures, which are just band-aids anyways, will hopefully not be necessary anymore, right? Because it's not really necessary to tell a European, hey, I have to patrol your beach because you cannot eat a sea turtle. Um, because it has already, the process has been a little bit quicker, or not quicker, but it has started a little bit earlier, I would say, in certain countries. And so I can see, for example, right now, which I love, I started about 17 years ago to work here in the Caribbean. And back in the days, we were visiting schools, talking to the kids. And some of these kids are now working for me as one of, or some of the local assistants, right? They are patrolling the beaches. And I can tell it's, the mindset is changing, just easy as that.
I think you raise a really important point there also about culture, and you're correct. So correct. You said the right thing in correcting my terminology there as well, changing that to a legal take. But there is always a sensitivity to remember that it could have been part of the culture of the area to put more food on the table. That was a way of life. And we need to make sure that people are looked after and are heard. I interviewed excellent journalists on tree thieves about the Midwest, timber logging, the illegal timber logging, and that obviously it's terrible to fell beautiful, protected, large trees for all the reasons that we know. But that discussion did dive deep into the pressures and the culture behind that. But in your book, you talk about Pablo, who you employed, who would formerly illegally take, but actually he's a lovely gentleman, and he has a better opportunity for providing for his family by paid employment working for the sea turtle. So often it's so easy to demonize individuals, but frankly, they're just trying to look after their family. So I thank you for being so careful about that in your book. It's really
Well,
good.
yeah, I think it's just because we don't we don't often think about it in our society. I think often enough, right, that we are imposing our values, our ideas of how the world should work and should not work onto, the global south. So it's still the colonialist in us, I would say sometimes,
Mm.
um and so I'm a firm believer that that has to stop, that we need to involve people. And I think it has never helped, and honestly it doesn't matter in what direction I'm looking in conservation, if we are um, also alienating people, right? So we have to talk to each other. We have to sit down on the same table and find a common denominator and find the common ground, not what divides us. I think it doesn't matter
Mm.
if we look into politics. It doesn't matter if we look into high level policy things. I don't know if we, even if it's about veganism, I don't think that we're convincing people of our opinion just by stating it more loudly or more aggressively. I really think we need to listen to each other, right? And trying to understand, trying to walk in each other's shoes, because we all have reasons to think the way we're thinking, right? Upbringing, whatever not. So, and I don't think that's very different from coming from different cultures, right? Understanding of how that has come to be, and what, yeah, what we can learn from each other as well. Because I think there's always a valuable lesson to be learned from each other.
I absolutely agree with you. And that's in literally every sphere of life. Um, and you've obviously, you're very passionate, I rightly so, about marine life and sea turtles, and have been shouting about facing the problem, getting the message across to schools, in the media. But there was one thing that really changed things for you and put you in a global sphere. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, my 8 minutes of fame is a viral video that I recorded while I was doing my PhD in Costa Rica, or the work for my PhD, where we were on a boat collecting samples on mating sea turtles. And we had this particular male on board that had something funny stuck in its nose, and it later turned out to be a plastic straw. And I didn't mean for it to go viral. I really just kind of had the camera running while my colleague Nathan was pulling on that straw. He was collecting the critters that live on the turtles and uploading it. Yeah, we did not know that it would go as viral as it did. And I think in the beginning I also didn't really know what to do now that it was viral, okay, but our world is so fast moving. But in the hindsight now, it's almost 10 years ago, so that was 2015. It has provided so much visibility to the issue of plastics. That's for one thing, right? There is this cute animal that was in severe pain and also suffered for 8 minutes, in kind of close up in front of the eyes of everybody. And I think it also really showed that it's, just a small item that can cause this kind of suffering. And we all probably felt a little bit guilty watching it, because I think nobody can say they've never used a straw in their life.
Yeah.
And so for me, making this really horrible, 8 minutes of suffering, I feel it eventually actually turned into something positive, because it provided me with this platform that I am able to lend my voice to sea turtles and their cause, and talk about a lot of other things that are happening in the ocean, that are not good, that need to change. And there, the common denominator is us humans and how we live, right? Our lifestyle. And so that also means there's a lot of opportunity for all of us to help make a change. So you don't have to travel as a volunteer to Costa Rica to walk the beaches with me, but you can sit literally at home and just, go about your daily choices and make just slightly different choices about plastic, about how you are transporting yourself. If we talk about climate change and other things that sea turtles are threatening. And I think while, it was horrible, I think this, yeah, it ended up being something probably very valuable, a valuable lesson to be learned on my personal level, but I think also for humanity.
I mean, did lead to a sort of global anti-straw movement, and you spend your time advocating for marine life. Tell us about some of the things that you've been up to. I note that you're a time next generation leader, and some of the other communication projects you've been involved in recently.
Yeah, so I think with the viral video, I discovered social media for myself as a tool for sure. I wasn't really a big fan of it. I think it's a time suck, to be quite honest. I still believe it's a time suck, but at least, it can be turned into something useful as well. You can reach so many people in so many different parts of the world just, by the click of a button, even if you are as isolated as I am here in the jungles of Costa Rica. And so what I really try is to change behavior as well, right? To make people feel they have control about certain things, that are affecting sea turtles, and to convince them that they want to change something, trying to publish, beautiful photos of sea turtles, but also not so beautiful things about the threats that sea turtles are facing. And just trying really to, yeah, pretty much take advantage of any opportunity to talk people. And a lot of times it's not even about talking to people that are already agreeing with me, but it's really about getting to the people that have never even thought about our ocean, that have no connection to it. And I don't want to say they don't care. I think a lot of times it's more about ignorance and apathy, maybe even. So maybe shaking them awake and eliciting some type
Yes.
of emotional reaction with, for example, the video with a straw or something like that.
So with what you've learned in the last 16 years on site, what excites you still? What makes you feel hopeful for the future of our sea turtle population?
Yeah, I think every single time one of my mamas are coming back, that excites me because it is difficult for me to forget that this is the one out of 1,000 that has made it into adulthood and that is carrying the weight of producing a next generation. It is also always absolutely beautiful to see the first nest hatching of the season, or every other nest as well, because sea turtle babies are just cute. And what gives me also a lot of hope is that sea turtles are incredibly resilient. So, I mean, not just because they have been around for millions of years, but I have seen sea turtles that have come with incredible injuries onto the beach, amputated flippers, big cuts from boat propellers and whatnot. And you sometimes can see the healing process within one nesting season, even, right? So, okay, she has lived through it and she seems to be okay. So hopefully she will come back in, 2 or 3 years to lay her eggs that she survived until then. So this resilience really is the hope that, if we would just be able to change a few things about our lifestyle and make the oceanic habitat just a little bit more livable and less dangerous, that they will bounce back from the brink of extinction, because every single species is threatened by extinction, that we have to say very clearly. And
Mm.
so this is really my hope. Maybe saying also what makes me not so hopeful is sometimes just human nature, right? So this is really where I'm looking, that people do not want to think about things like climate change or changing anything about how we live because it's so inconvenient. And sometimes also this emotional coldness towards other humans, but also other animals, that makes me a little bit cynical sometimes. But then again, I meet a lot of cool people, a lot of passionate people that are fighting the good fight together with me. And then I'm thinking, yeah, there is hope. There's always hope.
Excellent. And finally, Christine, what's your dream scenario?
In the sense of sea turtles?
Yeah, in a sense of sea turtles, marine life in general.
Well, I hope that, in, I don't know, in 10 years, 20 years, we will have figured out a way of living that is not overusing the resources of our planet, that climate change has stopped, maybe even been reversed, and we are seeing, a massive increase in sea turtles all around the world. That when I go into a coral reef, I see, hundreds of hawksbills in different life stages feeding on sponges. If I look into the seagrass meadows, I see green turtles in all life stages doing their job. And yeah, just not also see plastic floating around in our oceans, or, see a big fishing trawler out in the open ocean that are harvesting too much of what our planet provides for free, pretty much.
Well, I believe that we have science to address everything, do we have the will? Well, there's plenty of good people that I talk to on this podcast and know, so we have to be positive, but we have to keep banging the drum. Christine Figgener, it's been an absolute privilege to talk to you. Your work is essential for the well-being, not just of sea turtles, but the ecosystems in which they live, and inspiring everybody to care. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Sharon. I really appreciate it.
So everybody, go and buy My Life with Sea Turtles by Christine Figgener. And tomorrow, this is being recorded on the 12th of June 2024. So audio copy, because even if you're not a marine biologist, which I'm not, it's so well written. It really also takes you on the journey of sea turtles in their life, but also Christine's personal journey and all the people she meets. So very well done.